let's talk about this. How good is Steve Sarkeesian at recruiting? So we went back, looked at the last couple of recruiting classes since his time here at Texas, and I just wanted to jump in and basically have a discussion about how well you think he's done at recruiting. Do you expect it to continue? And let's start with the 22 class. So what did you think of that? And honestly, when I went back and looked at it, Gerald, my first thoughts were this wasn't as good as I thought it was.
Yeah, I mean, you have 16 of the 28 guys transferred out, which is a big number. And I think we'll see a little bit of a trend in this where like the top end of these classes they hit on really, really well, but that like middle of the group isn't necessarily as developed. But like that 22 class, like Kelvin Banks, DJ Campbell, Jaden Blue was in that class. Like it was a good class, and I think for me, like the biggest impact of the 22 class was like just the signal of what Texas was going to be about, right? Like half of those 28 kids were in the trenches, right? And that was like the shifting the philosophy of how Texas approached football in the past. And so, there is room for improvement. Obviously, you don't want nearly half of your kids more than half of your kids to transfer out of the class, but that's also just part of what college football is nowadays, right? Like the guys are going to transfer 3 years in because they want to find the place where they can land. But again, I think specifically offensive line, Sark continues, and through by virtue of Kyle Flood, I think had a lot of success in that 22 class, and I think we're going to see that trend kind of continue.
No, I agree. It's funny because, other than the offensive line, I think this class was kind of a bust. The names I put down there, like Brennan Thompson, obviously transfer out. We had really high expectations for him. Jamon Tapp, again, a guy that I think we had a little bit more expectations for. And then Justice Finkley, great teammate, great person, but he just did not hit anywhere near what we thought he was going to hit. He was a high 4-star recruit, and he's going to play at Kansas, probably start there next year, but he just wasn't what I thought he was going to be. But I will say this, coming in here, Texas was bad in the trenches for years, and this class changed that. So to me, this class is like, it's over a C. I would consider it like a B-type class because they hit exactly where they needed to hit. Yeah. You got Kelvin Banks, you got Cam Williams, you got Cole Hudson, you got those guys in the class. They've been able to produce, and I don't think any of the offensive linemen from that class have transferred out, which is crazy to think about, that you've been able to hold on to all of them. And Neto's been here since then, and he's barely played. So very impressive. He got exactly what we needed. And I think that's the story of the Steve Sarkeesian era. Whenever he needed a recruit, he got it. Whenever you needed that recruit to develop, to take Texas to that next level, they got it. So overall, I think it's a good class. Now, it is as good as I remembered it being. No, it wasn't. When I went back and looked at the list, I was actually kind of surprised.
Yeah, it was, I think, it was one of those classes that built momentum for the program. Like, that transitional class was okay. And then they got into that first full class. And that's really when I think people started to buy into Sark. And so like the impact of the players on the field, I think we talked about, obviously, the offensive line is probably where the biggest impact from that class was as far as on the field, but creating momentum, creating the vibes and the aura for, to steal a word from the kids right around Texas, in that like transitional era, because they were coming off a 5-7 season when that happened, right? So like being able to land that level of class coming off of one of the worst seasons in recent memory, which is weird to say because, again, Texas had been pretty bad in recent memory. Having a losing season, landing I think it was a top 5, top 10 class, and being able to create some of the buzz, like, oh, people are bought into what Sark is doing. People are bought into what Texas is doing. The arrow was pointing in the right direction in spite of the on-field results. And so I think that more than anything is why I would grade that class a little higher, right? Give it a B, because the simple fact that like that was really where Texas is now started.
Yeah, 100%. Let's jump over to the 23 class. Better. I think this class actually has a chance to be like kind of a generational class because you have Arch Manning and Anthony Hill in it. That's a pretty damn good combo of 1 and 2. The biggest miss for me was Jonte Cook. Obviously, we know what's happened to him. He's still not on any team, I don't think, at this point. So that was definitely the biggest miss, but he didn't really miss, I will say, talent-wise, because we know Jonte Cook is very talented. It's more of a head thing with him. But overall, what did you think when looking back on this class?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of the same as what I said for 22. I think the top end of this class is really impactful and will continue to be really impactful. That like middle to bottom middle of the class, you see most of the guys that have transferred out already. I think 6 of them come from that like the middle chunk of the class. Those like mid 4 stars, a couple of 3 stars in there. But then you also have those moments where like they hit on a guy like Quintravian Wisner in the portal, who was a 3 star. Who I he's not a guy that you would normally bring in that class, right? Because you have CJ Baxter at the top end of that class. So you bring in Trey Wisner, who got passed up on the depth chart in high school, and they still hung on to him. They kept him around, and he turned out to be a solid player for them. And so I think, again, you have guys on the top end like Anthony Hill. The jury is still technically out for Arch Manning, right? But Arch Manning, CJ Baxter, you have Leon Galefau in that class, Malik Muhammad, Derek Williams has been a player for Texas as well. And he, despite the injuries, he's a guy who can contribute. So I think this class, if we gave 22 a B, this is probably like a B plus class in my book. Verging on if Arch lives up to the archness, then I think we'll be able to bump that letter grade up to an A.
No, I agree. And I think another name that you said that I was going to hit on as well is Malik Muhammad. I think if he lives up to that recruiting level too, we could be talking about this as like an all-time class at Texas, because then you have, like, let's say Malik Muhammad lives up to that finally. We're talking about first or second round corner, first or second round first round linebacker and Anthony Hill, and then a first top 10 overall pick in Arch Manning. That's a really, really damn good class. So I mean, and like you said, I think if you look at most recruiting classes, look at the top 10 players, I feel like they did a better job of hitting on the top 10 players in this class than they did the 22. 22 was like half and half. They hit on half of them. They didn't hit on the other half. I feel like this is more like a 70% hit rate out of the 23 class so far, and it could get even higher. We'll see. For the 24 class, it's too early, but anytime you get someone like Colin Simmons, who I think is probably going to be a top 10 pick whenever he decides to come out in the NFL draft, I would say it's a damn good class.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And we talk about like those must-get guys in the state. Texas used to not get them, and now in back-to-back classes, right? 23, Anthony Hill was a must-get guy for Texas in-state. The state of Texas doesn't put out linebackers like that routinely, so he was a must-get. And then in 24, Colin Simmons was a must-get guy for Texas, in-state kid, elite level kind of guy, and they landed him, and he came in and lived up to the billing. And so I think, Ryan Wingo's a guy who came in and played for them early, right? Brandon Baker's got, obviously they didn't need him on the offensive line, but he's a guy who probably could have played. Xavier Filsby is a guy who could have played, right? Jared Gibson was a guy who got some snaps, right? This is a group that I think came in and has an opportunity to be really, really good. Again, I'm a little worried about like the bottom half of the class. We haven't heard a ton, especially about the wide receivers. I think most of them have already gotten recruited over in that group. So I'm curious to see what happens with like Freddie DeBose, Parker Livingston, that group of folks. But again, I think the top 10, top 15 of these guys in this class have a really good opportunity to be elite and get you to like that A status.
Yeah, I think it's kind of weird because Tom Herman got a bunch of 3-star guys that occasionally would play like a way above their heads and then get drafted in the NFL and play really well. Where Steve Sarkeesian is taking these 4 and 5-star guys and he's developing them extremely well, but he's yet to develop those like 3-star guys into stars yet. Whereas like Trey Weiser is really the only one I can think of that's like, damn, that guy's a really good football player. That was like a lower level recruit. That just may be a talent that Tom Herman had that Steve Sarkeesian didn't. I would rather have Steve Sarkeesian's thing because that's how you win national championships. You don't really win national championships by raising the floor of a 3-star. You raise it by bringing up this to the ceiling of the 4 and 5-star guys. So that's fine. And then we'll talk about the 25 class, but I think this has the chance to be the best class that Steve Sarkeesian has had. And obviously they ranked the number 1 class. So that shouldn't be any surprise there. But Jonah Williams, Justice Terry, Khalid Lockett, we just talked about a lot of them. I think this could be a very, very special group. And literally all around, like you have Cade Phillips at cornerback. You have Jonah Williams at safety. You have Khalid Lockett at wide receiver. You have KJ Lacey. Maybe he pops off and does a really good job at quarterback. You never know. This could be like a generational type class.
Yeah, and I think, KJ Lacey is a guy who I think gets unfairly looked over because Diabell is in the next class, right? But KJ Lacey was a dude, and there's a reason why, Auburn and Alabama both, offered him and we're on him, right? So like, let's not overlook KJ Lacey. I really appreciate you shouting him out there, because I think he's a guy who Texas fans unjustly overlook because we have him the next shiny thing. But yeah, I mean, Lance Jackson's guy who's going to come in, and I think he's probably an early contributor. Justice Terry, Bo Barnes, we already talked about some of these guys. Myron Charles, like, this is a group that I think can come in, and they come in a year where Texas, it's not rebuilding, but like they're reloading. And so they're a part of that. I think they have an opportunity to jump in and be immediately impactful. And so I think you'll see some of these 25 guys get earlier opportunities than some of the 23 and 24 kids did, just simply because of timing, right? Timing is everything in life. And so them coming in at this spot, if they can jump up and catch a coach's eye, this could be a really impactful class really early.
No, 100%. I think, honestly, the 23 class is what it is because of Arch. Like, if you transferred Arch to the 24-25 class, it'd be really, really special. I think the 24 and 25 class is more well-rounded in the type of football players that we've gotten. So I think Steve Sarkeesian has just gotten better every year at recruiting at Texas, which makes sense. You're winning. You're getting the recruiting better, number one. Number two, you're also, I feel like he's learning more, because he hasn't been a head coach that long, learning more what he likes and how to develop and how to do well. So that makes perfect sense as well. But I think it's really exciting times for Texas, and I think it'll be a really good job for Steve Sarkeesian going forward, recruiting wise. NIL obviously helps that as well. But Sark's doing it at a level Texas hasn't seen, honestly, since the heyday of the Mac Brown era.
Yeah, and I think, sorry about that, my my
You're
3-year-old
fine.
wanted to join the
You're fine.
live stream. But yeah, I think Sark comes in at a really advantageous time, because he hits at the NIL era. Texas is ready to get back to its winning ways, right? I think the boosters were all very ready to move on from what had been happening, right? So it's easy to get them aligned, right? It's really easy to get them aligned about a guy who, like Steve Sarkeesian, has NFL experience, has experience, running one of the most optimized offenses in college football history, right? He comes in at the perfect time. The boosters are aligned. Chris Del Conte is aligned behind him. And so you're able to get this level of momentum, right? They're able to create that and take advantage of that. On top of that, right? Because we've said it before, and I'll say it again, all of the guys that Texas recruits are going to get paid wherever they go to, right? So it's not just the NIL advantages, but Sark built a staff that, one, can connect with the players really, really well, but also has the ability to develop them really, really well. Because that, with these high-level kids, you go to Florida, you go to Georgia, you go to Ole Miss, you're going to get paid, right? They all play in the SEC. The NIL budget is going to be there for most of these schools that are recruiting these elite kids. But being able to say, hey, you're going to get paid in college, you'll get your $500,000 or whatever for being an elite offensive lineman, but Kyle Flood's going to turn you into a first-round pick and get you in the NFL draft, right? So that's the differentiator, I think, for Texas, how they've built this recruiting machine.
No, 100%. I think the last thing is just winning that national championship. They've hit on everything else. That's literally the last thing. That's going to take the longest, but if you keep at it, it's going to happen.